They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And so happy to be back together again. We love to talk to incredible women doing incredible things. And Virginia Kruta is one of those women. She joins us today on this episode. You can give her a follow at VA Kruta, K-R-U-T-A. She is a writer and incredible. She does an incredible job. She was with the Daily Caller, now with the Daily Wire. Virginia, thanks so much for being with us today.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So before we jump in, we always talk to people about how they get to where they are, and we love to hear your story. So take us through how you arrived in the sphere of political politics and reporting.
Okay, well, I kind of got interested in politics. I mean, really kind of followed it my entire adult life. I mean, the first election I voted in was 2000, and that was insane, as I'm sure you remember. But then I spent some time in the military, and when it came time for the Obamacare passage, this was 2009, 2010, I was getting ready to get out of the military and deciding what I wanted to do. And so I started kind of writing a little bit, and I knew I was going to go back to school. And when I got out of the military, I got to be friends with Dana Lash, who is, as you know, hosting radio all over the country and now based in Texas, but she used to live in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And when she lived here, I'd go down to the studio. She had me come in and do a hit with her and I think Stacey Washington, Stacey on the Right, who also is from St. Louis. And so and she's an Air Force veteran. So I'd gotten out of the Army, Stacey had gotten out of the Air Force, and we were in the studio with Dana talking about the implications of allowing women in combat when Panetta made that decision. And so a few things happened, but then Dana knew she was going to be on vacation when the Obamacare decision dropped, when the immigration law in Arizona, SB 1070, when that was decided on, she knew she was going to be out of town. So she gave me the keys to her website, more or less, and said, I need something up on these things. And so I started just kind of writing things for her. And then Independent Journal Review picked me up in 2015. And then I was there for about 3 years, and I went to the Daily Caller, and I was there. Gosh, it was probably about 3 years there too. And then I've been at the Daily Wire since November of last year, 21.
So you do a lot to cover. It looks like you do a lot to cover politics. That seems to be your primary focus. But I was really fascinated to see that you also cover The View a lot, which I found was
yes.
Somebody's got to do it, and I'm glad it doesn't have to be me. So my question, it's a twofold question.
Sure.
First of all, how can you stand it? That's my first question. But my second is, I don't get the appeal. Do you understand what it is that other women see in that show? I need to know.
Well, I think as it was originally, and when Candace Cameron Bure was on there, when Elizabeth Hasselbeck was on there, it was a little easier to watch because they were really willing to push back. Meghan McCain did it too for a bit, but what you see now is just kind of the latest evolution of it. And so you see Democrats and Republicans, and I air quotes around Republicans, talking about things, but they all have this common ground, and that is that they all agree that Trump is bad enough that it's okay to sacrifice every other policy you hold dear as long as you don't have to deal with him. And so it's a very different show now than it used to be, even just a few years ago. But I think that the idea is good. And I think women like to see women talking and even arguing a little bit and disagreeing, but not in a way that is combative to a degree that you don't like each other afterwards. They like to see the productive conversations. Like if you want to go back to the debate about a week and a half ago between JD Vance and Tim Walz, one of the things that we said after that was that it was so conciliatory. Like they were not angry at each other. They weren't calling each other names. It was clear that they disagreed on many things, but they were also able to find common ground. And to see a group of women do that when I don't think it's typical, because I mean, if you go out and you look online, look in the Twitter space, which the X space now, when a woman posts something, most of the negative comments don't come from men; they come from other women, and you see
Absolutely.
women very actively tearing each other down, and I think women like to see that not happening. And even if they don't always agree politically, they're fine with watching the conversation play out between people who can be friends afterwards.
You know, I think one of the things that really, it kills me, and we'll talk more about your work in a second, Virginia, but you're hitting on something that I think Katie and I have probably talked about before, and that is that it is really hard for me to have people who are feminists. How about that? Hold on a second. I told you these things are going to commit suicide out of my ears. I'm deformed. I'm deformed. I am absolutely deformed. My ear holes are smaller than anything on my body, which is not small at all. So I don't understand. Okay. Hi, Misty. We'll just go right back to it. Okay. Virginia, I'm so glad you brought this up, because one of the things that really irks me at my soul is that we, for a long time, were raising strong women. We were raising women to be supportive of other women, that we were supposed to uplift each other. But I can't tell you in any company what I have been called, because I am a Trump supporter and have been since 2015.
Oh, for sure.
I have been called all sorts of names. And I know that experience is not just unique to me. It happens to people who don't have a platform. It happens to everybody, because women only like you. Certain women, liberal women, seem to only like you if you agree with them 100%. Any shred of disagreement makes you the enemy. And so I did like watching The View, because I liked watching people talk about different issues. And I think we need to do a better job as a society figuring that out. But what has become so crazy to me is how hateful a lot of people who would probably call themselves feminists really are.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, I went to, this would have been 2018, because it was the year that, it was the year that Cori Bush lost her first primary. AOC did a rally in St. Louis. And so I went to it because nobody knew who I was. I was just a contributor at the Daily Caller at the time. And so I went to the rally, and there's a photo on the internet of me floating around with AOC, which is really funny. But so I went and I wrote about it, and I was really impressed by, because I'd been to political events before, the amount of anger in that room. And it was mostly women, because it was a rally for Cori Bush with AOC speaking. So it was mostly women, mostly liberal women, and everybody was angry. And this was 2018. And I was like, okay, I get it. You don't like the president. That's fine. You know, but 2018, there were a lot of Democrats holding some serious power, and it wasn't like they didn't have any resources. So, but there was this, and as you watch them speaking, you realize where the anger is coming from. Somebody else has something and they want it. And they think that wielding the political structure was the best way to get it, instead of going out and getting a job or taking responsibility for your own actions. And so I posted about it, and I was talking about, I ended up doing a short hit on Fox and Friends a couple of days afterward. And I was getting, I hadn't used my Instagram in a year, and I never used it for politics. I was getting death threats on my Instagram DMs. And I'm like, I haven't even used this account for a year, guys. And somebody, I don't know how it got out there, but I got mail at my house. Like, it wasn't super threatening. It was just like, we know where you live. I mean, so yeah, it was an interesting situation. And it was really funny because it happened like the day before I went on vacation. And, you know, we always make fun of the people who get themselves in hot water and then suddenly they're on vacation. And I'm like, that's actually what happened. And I wasn't in any trouble because Jeff Ingersoll at the Daily Caller, he was my editor-in-chief, and I still talk to him all the time. He was like, this is kind of hilarious, actually. You know, nobody was mad at me, but except for the people who are at home, you know, with nothing better to do than and you think all I said was that socialism is a very attractive thing, especially to women, because you know, especially as a mother, you have this idea that, you know, my children deserve an education and my children deserve the best healthcare, and that may be true, but you have to remember that it's also your job to make sure that they have it, not somebody else's. And I was, you know, you can get wrapped up in that and think, oh, well, if the state is going to give me the education, then of course that's how it should be, you know. And I was just kind of pushing back on that a little bit. And I get these emails. Why do you want kids to die? What? Yeah, like, that's not what I said. Well, you said they don't deserve the best healthcare. I said, no, what I said was they don't deserve to have the government provide it for you. There's not the same. And so, yeah, I've definitely seen a lot, and most of it was from women.
I think part of the problem is that too many people don't understand the price you pay when the government does start providing all those services. I was really shocked. I was listening to an episode on Huberman Labs, which I love to listen to, you know, the Stanford University neuroscientist, I think he is, who has a very popular podcast. And he was talking with another doctor who does a lot of work on trauma. And they've done all these studies actually out in California where they showed that just more activity, and they were talking specifically about yoga, was very, very, very helpful to kids, especially kids who were kind of struggling with ADHD or other problems. And so their conclusion was, we need the Department of Education to mandate this across the country. And I thought, oh my gosh, you have no idea what you're asking for. And I can promise you, if the Department of Education is the one who's implementing this, they will absolutely destroy it and botch it and make it very expensive. So I think that's one of the problems, you know, with a lot of people in advocating for socialism. I want to shift a little bit. I love this topic of the View. I just find it so captivating.
Sure.
But I want to shift the focus just a little bit toward specifically toward this current presidential race. In one of your articles, I was just really struck by the quotes from the View where they had Kamala on, and the outright lies, just the lies, where like Kamala said, you know, Trump has said he will get rid of the Constitution. And, you know, this really struck me. Jen knows this, but last week I had to speak to a bunch of hundreds of high school students here in Northern Virginia. And one of the things that stood out for me so much was that, so I got put in the position of representing the Trump campaign, not as an official, just I was speaking on their behalf, you know, representing the views of the Trump campaign. And I had to speak with somebody who was representing the views of the Harris campaign. And the lies. What?
Did they know what her views are? Because she hasn't really told them that she
you know, it's the talking points. Right. But the lies, just the outright lies that came out of his mouth. And I'm just, you know, I'm going to throw it out to you. Like, really give me an honest assessment, because maybe I'm a little bit blinded by my support for Trump, but tell me the truth. Like, he does not lie about Kamala the way she lies about him. Am I right?
No, you're right. The thing is, now you could say that, both of them sometimes have a tendency to exaggerate or to say something that isn't quite so. And sometimes it's because they don't understand it or they don't fully understand the topic. And they're just like, oh, well, maybe this could happen. No, you can't do that, you know? And so you have that. But if you look at the way the campaign is supposed to work, what they're supposed to be doing is tell you why I'm a better candidate than the other guy, right? To do that, Kamala has to lie. Mm-hmm. To do that, Trump does not have to lie. All he has to do is let her talk. I mean, look at how many of his ads are just her talking. And then I'm Donald Trump and I approve this message. Like that's.
Yeah. And growing up in California and watching her over the last 20 years run our state into the ground, she is a scary, scary figure. And it's because she doesn't stand for anything. She can be bought. She can be swayed. Yes, she is a far left progressive person, probably in her heart, but I mean, I've said it before, she'll stab her grandmother in the back if it gets her to the next job. And that's why she can't articulate her point of view, because she really doesn't have one. And she doesn't have a good understanding of what she's supposed to do in front of the people she's standing in front of. But I would love to ask you this question, Virginia, because I've noticed something really disturbing kind of rearing its head again. And that is this idea of misinformation. It seems like Kamala Harris, that campaign, the Biden administration, if they don't like something, they won't defend their position. They just say it's an outright lie. And the perfect example is the hurricane, where President Trump and Republicans have been saying, look, FEMA's out of money and we have American citizens who are suffering here. I heard Kamala Harris on CNN this week saying that that was misinformation that was killing people because they weren't applying for resources at FEMA. And I just found today an LA Times article from August 30th, so well before the hurricanes, that has a story about $21 million going to LA County to house illegal immigrants who were stuck on Skid Row. The money from FEMA has been spent other places. That's just a fact. It's not misinformation. And it's scary to me that they think they can get away by telling people it's a lie when it's not.
Well, and that's it. It is interesting. Peter Doocy addressed that because he got into a spat with Karine Jean-Pierre over this same issue the other day. And he was talking about the fact that and Vance brought it up at a rally too. They talked about this idea that, well, there are different buckets of money within FEMA. And it's like you have a checking account and you have a savings account. Maybe you have a money market account, but all that money is fungible. You can move it from place to place, right? What he's saying is that the American people see that the federal government that way. And so when we see FEMA and say, oh, well, they've got this bucket of money that's going to the migrant resettlement program and this bucket of money that's for disaster relief. When we see Americans suffering, it doesn't compute that without an act of Congress, maybe you can't move money from one bucket to another. But maybe you can't, but maybe you shouldn't have been setting aside money to fund migrant resettlement anyway. And that's the point. That's the larger point, that there is a bucket of money in the federal, meaning the United States Emergency Management Agency, that is wholly dedicated to settling people who aren't supposed to be here. Like that's the larger problem. But to say that the money's not going to them, obvious lie. And the American people know that. That's the thing. Now, as far as it costing lives, I think anybody who's ever interacted with FEMA on an individual level is probably not going to FEMA because they've been to FEMA on it. Like, look at what happened to Maui. We don't talk about it anymore, but this same thing happened when the fires were ravaging Maui. The same thing happened now after Helene. I don't know what they're going to do now in the aftermath of Milton. Thank God it wasn't as bad as they were predicting. But, you know, that these are things that when you have Federal Emergency Management Agency, and that's literally your title, there is no part of that that suggests you should be expending any effort or funding toward people who their first act in this country was to break the law. And we're giving them money. Why?
I think one of the really interesting lessons, especially with Helene, though, is exactly this, that the problem with federal government taking on any role is that It is big. It is bureaucratic. It cannot move in a nimble way. It cannot be adaptive. It doesn't know local conditions. It cannot be innovative, right? I worked for DHS. Things are planned and plotted out years in advance. And what I have found so interesting, and I think a lot of Americans have been really moved by this actually, is the way everyday Americans stepped up to help in the case of Helene. It has been incredible. Yeah. All the videos that have popped up about like how people have thrown together little bridges to get people out of being stuck in the hills. Yeah. And again, aside from FEMA's outrageous corruption and spending its money on things it has no business spending money on, but even with whatever is left, they don't seem to be doing anything effective.
That's true. And the other thing that really struck me this week was the unnecessary beef between Ron DeSantis and Kamala Harris, where she's saying, well, he's not taking my calls. And he's like, lady, you didn't call me. And so there was that kind of angle. And then you got Joe Biden throwing both of them throwing Kamala under the bus. Like, oh, Ron DeSantis is fine. We've been talking. And the thing is with Joe Biden, you don't know if it's true or not. But even if whether it is or not, it doesn't matter because he's just torpedoed his own vice president. But what I think is interesting is all the people on Twitter are Stephen King of all people was like, it's horrible and petty for Ron DeSantis to not take her calls. And my thought was, why would he waste time taking her call? A, she's not in charge and he's already talking to President Biden, ostensibly. And B, he was better equipped to handle this than any of them were. Mm-hmm. Because there he is after Helene going like, no, we don't want your money. Give it to North Carolina. We're good.
He is, I laugh. He should be the hurricane czar in this country because he actually really knows how to handle a hurricane. He's really good at it.
Exactly. And you know what? If Trump gets reelected, somebody should stick that in his ear. Say like, yeah.
Wouldn't that be funny? A little, natural disasters.
He can still be Florida governor, but let's have him write our hurricane response plan.
Exactly.
Let's keep him on as Florida governor, but yeah.
It is an interesting topic, though, because nobody's talking about whether or not Trump and DeSantis have talked about the hurricane. It's all because Kamala has tried to stick herself into that situation because people are challenging her capabilities of leadership. And I think it's really interesting to see the dynamic between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris right now. I really believe more and more that he is ticked off and he doesn't like that he's been cut out. I think there is a real beef between these two.
Well, I think there is. I think there's a bigger beef between Jill and Kamala, but that's because I think that Joe Biden, if he thought that his legacy was secure, I don't think he'd have a problem with not being president anymore. Mm-hmm. Because he did it, he can say he did it, and he can go hang out with his grandchildren at the beach, and he'll be fine. I don't think Jill wanted to leave the White House. And I think that she was angry at Kamala when she called Joe a racist on the debate stage in 2019. And I think she's still angry at her now. I think she blames Kamala, in addition to Pelosi and the Obamas, for forcing Joe out of the White House or forcing him out of the 2024 race. And it makes sense that she would do whatever she can to undermine. And if she's just feeding Joe information saying, hey, look, if you do this, but you look at what happened when Kamala was on The View, he held a press conference during her broadcast. Like he's been counter programming her for the last 2 weeks. He was all but like, nobody even knew if he was alive 3 weeks ago. And now suddenly she's doing this press thing and he's everywhere and he's coherent. What happened? I don't know. But so suddenly they're juicing up the meds or whatever it is that they're doing, and he's out in front of everybody, but only when she's on camera. So I think that there's something to that.
So we've only got a couple of minutes, but I want to finish with this because this is just too good. So you retweeted something that came out of the interview between Jimmy Kimmel and Tim Walz, which just blows my mind. So Kimmel said to Walz, I can come up with no higher compliment than this. but you seem to me like the kind of guy who cleans the lint out after the dryer. Who cleans the lint out of the dryer after every use. Ladies, I just have to ask you, do you want a man who actually cleans the lint out of the dryer?
Yes.
You do want that kind of man? Oh okay, my God.
So I'm laughing in part because
it's no secret. The world's unpredictable. One moment, everything's fine, and the next, the power's out and the cell towers are down. But with a satellite phone from sat123.com, you don't have to be cut off from the world. No matter where you are or what's happening, Sat123 keeps you connected. Whether you're deep in the mountains, on the road, or dealing with a natural disaster, your satellite phone will work when nothing else does. This is about being prepared. Sat123.com is family-owned, American-built, and focused on keeping you safe. They understand that in today's world, connection is more than convenience. It's essential. So here's the deal. Go to sat123.com and use code Katie for $25 off your first purchase. Don't get caught off guard. Stay connected. Stay prepared with Sat123.
Because my husband does this more than I do, but I'm also laughing. I'm also laughing, but he works in a bakery. So there's always like flour and just, it's most of the time, if there's lint in the dryer, it's his fault. So he cleans it out. That's kind of the thinking there. But no, the rest of the interview, if you remember kind of the staged phone call when Kamala tells Tim Walz she wants him to be her running mate, and it was this thing, and they made a big deal out of the fact that he didn't recognize the number and didn't answer it the first time, so he missed the call. So Kimmel was already talking about the fact that they had missed the call, and so he's like, so have you updated your contacts so that you don't miss another call from her? And Walz is like, of course I did. Well, then he says, well, if I can ask, what do you have her saved as? And Walz does this kind of like, he looks down like he knows he's going to get ripped apart for this. And then he says, my dry cleaner. So he's got Kamala saved in his phone as my dry cleaner. And of course, Kimmel's like, well, what happens if the dry cleaner calls? But so it became this thing, so the laundry joke was all kind of a throwback to that, I think. But this idea that the guy who has a lie for everything couldn't come up with one on the fly to avoid embarrassing himself and saying,
I think I don't know. I think he is one of the worst. I question her because of that decision. Okay. I know Katie said we're coming to the end. We are, but I have two questions for you. One is a fun one. Well, actually, they're both fun ones, but one is a little more serious than the other. So first one is something we talked about before we started today, and that is the state of journalism. The New York Times did a piece because of the passing of Ethel Kennedy. They did an obituary, and you noticed that like 3 or 4 paragraphs in, instead of just doing the obituary about Ethel Kennedy, who had a history herself, they of course have to use this space to attack RFK Jr., who of course that's his mother that passed away because of his endorsement of Trump. What are your comments on that and the state of journalism just in general?
I don't think that it's odd that this would happen. I mean, you're talking about major newspapers these are the people who run cover for dead terrorists and who, if they can use it to make a political point, they will. And some of it's on the author, but it also got past editorial. So you got to understand that there are a lot of people, and we know people have left the New York Times because this is the culture that's here. And so I don't think that it's a surprise that it's happening, but it just means that we have to work harder as media outlets ourselves to make sure that we're pushing back on that and offering a different perspective, because there are people in the middle. Now, the far left is probably going to read that and go, yeah, I agree with that. But there are going to be people in the middle, particularly people who might have been Kennedy voters, who are going to look at that and go, why did they do this to her? This is a woman who, whether you agreed with her politically or not, did a lot of work for the environment, did a lot of work for human rights, and reached across the aisle a lot of times to do that. She's a, Presidential Medal of Freedom winner and 2014, I think. And to pause 4 paragraphs into her obituary and talk about the fact that because her son endorsed Trump, now none of her children will talk to him. Like, it seems unnecessary.
Sure does. Okay. So my last question is about the bakery. You've got to tell us about this. I think it's so cool. And we should have talked about it at the very beginning, but Katie, her husband has a 100-year-old bakery. How cool is that?
Oh, I didn't even know.
It's actually, so in 1919, so it's actually 105 now. We were able to have a really big 100-year celebration right before everything shut down for COVID. Thankfully, we got that in before all that happened. But yeah, we've been. They were in East St. Louis for quite a while. In 1974, we moved out to where we are now, which is about 10 miles east of the Missouri border. But my husband's great grandfather was Russian, and he came over. He went to Germany for about 10 years and learned to bake, and then came in through Galveston and up the Mississippi River, ended up in East St. Louis, and they built the bakery there. So my husband's a 4th generation baker there. And it's just been, that, they have some great stories that have come through there. I'll probably botch this, but he had a great uncle who was killed at the Battle of the Bulge. And when his great grandmother went to get her citizenship, the judge, she got nervous and she forgot English. Like, she forgot how to speak English to answer the questions. And the judge looked over the paperwork and asked her, is it true that you sent two sons to war for this country? And she said, yes. She said, and the judge said, is it true that one didn't come back? And she said, yes. And they signed off on her paperwork and let her go, didn't ask her a single question. Wow. So, that's, and that's been every generation since has been, my father-in-law once asked when he was little, why don't we speak Russian at home? And his dad looked at him, he said, because we're Americans. We speak American. Like, what's wrong with you? Yeah. So it's a very, very typical American turn of the century story.
Thanks for sharing that.
And you just don't see that.
Yeah. I always have to bring that up because Katie knows Eastern European because, of course, Dr. G is Polish through Hungary, I think. And obviously that was his story, and my family's Czech. So it's always interesting to hear. And the assimilation, the effort to assimilate was so much different. And it's just neat to hear. So Virginia, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. Virginia Kruta is here. You can give her a follow at VA Kruta, Kruta, and check out the Daily Wire for all your latest news at dailywire.com. Virginia, thanks so much for being with us.
Sure.
And gosh, a couple of things too to thank you for. Thank you for helping us continue our success with Happy Women. 5-star reviews, super helpful. Sharing Happy Women with your friends, we also truly appreciate. And you can connect with us on all of our platforms, wherever you get your podcast or see your videos, SalemPodcastNetwork.com. Get Katie's book. It's called Next Gen Marxism. It's available on Amazon, wherever you get your books, or at katiegorka.org. You can search her out on Facebook as well. Just look for Catherine Gorka or Gorka Katie on X. And you can find me, Jennifer Horn Radio, Facebook and Instagram, and Jennifer Horn on X or on Truth. And thank you all for joining us. This is another episode of the Happy Women Podcast.